Yeah, we'll just continue with the second fellowship winner from last year, Katalin Fanni, Horváth, so I will ask her to join me here on stage and start her presentation.
Thank you so much. Welcome everyone, especially the members of the jury, as well as all dear guests. Please, it's an honor to be here, naturally, and please let me present my photo project. Okay, I can start it, I hope. So, revival is ethnographic terms, a cultural phenomenon through which the element of old traditions became relevant again, naturally in different forms. And my experience shows, and naturally this presentation will also shows, that this cultural phenomenon is really important, and especially important along the western border of Hungary. Because the population who is living here, this population is multilingual, and the former customs are transformed in parallel with the disappearance of the local languages. I began to photograph the life of ethnic in 2018. This is a region at the western border of the country, and these nationalities are the Gradišće Croats, the Hians Germans, and Slovenes, close to the Austrian and Slovenian border. And in the first year, I only visited a little valley, Pinka Valley. Pinka is a river at the western border, a few kilometers from Austria, and where the Croats and Germans have been living together 500 years ago, which is a really important thing. I will explain it. And a little bit later, I also visited the Croats villages above this region, and after was getting this fellowship, I started to visit the Slovene settlements close to the Austrian and Slovenian border, which has given me a wider understanding of the culture of ethnic minority who are living here in this region. At the beginning, in this project, in the first year, I only wanted to observe the preservation of the tradition, how this ethnic minority group preserve their century-old traditions and customs, which is really important that in the face of the constant assimilation during the last centuries. And by gaining local experience, I observed that the dimensions of the ethnic minority groups, these dimensions are the language use, religion, tradition, custom, habits, these dimensions define a minority culture, and which is going through constant transformation naturally. In the past couple of years, I visited 15 settlements, I think maybe more. And you know, I was only a photographer. I live in Budapest, so I hadn't any personal contact here before. And these ethnic minority groups, they were really nice. They admitted to me to take photos in their private life, naturally in traditional events, religious events, choirs, how they preserve their traditions. So I think it was a special process and moment for me. And naturally, week by week, month by month, year by year, I visited them. And I realized there are really interesting things. One of them, the question is the double border question, because I did personal interviews, and these interviews were really important because through these personal interviews, I have learned about the familiar and historical traumas of these ethnic minority groups. And it has become clear for me that these nationalities here at the western border of Hungary living in a kind of double border situation in a physically and in an intellectual sense also. And why? What it means? Because maybe you remember that in 1920, by the Trianon decision, these ethnic territories were cut in half. The one half of the families stayed in Hungary, but the other part of families, had to live in Austria. This was a really painful period. And naturally, it's a really important historical moment which influenced the life of these ethnic minority groups. And on the other hand, this double border situation comes from the presence of the West, the physical presence of the West, because here we connect the West. These people here, the nationalities, are working in Austria, not in Hungary, in Austria or in Slovenia, and they bring a lot of modern elements from the other countries. So this double border situation is really interesting, and I think it's really important in this question. And I know that after the Second War, the Iron Curtain, under the Russian power, when, for example, German language was not allowed to use, or the forced relocations in the 50s and in the 60s, where these nationalities have to go to another part of the country. This was a really painful period, and the sort of isolation began, because they were close from the other part of the country, from the other regions of the party, naturally, and from the world, and from Austria, from Slovenia. So during the second part of century, and these are a really big obstacle for these ethnic minorities. Maybe another thing which is really interesting, during my photographic work, I have realized that there are dual processes going in opposite directions. One of them, the local reconstruction of traditions, so the localization, and the global influence, which is, I think, it's not a unique in Hungary, it's a universal phenomenon in the world, across the world. How can preserve the national identity? How can yes, protect the ethnic identity at the same time? So, because I think it's also a topical issue around the world. And why I say it, because the imprints of modernization, the modern element, appear in the social life, in the traditions, in the cultural activities. And we can see on my photos also, I wanted to present naturally why so unique this region. Many photos present the historical and geographical background, but many photos in pair naturally try to show this transformation, these modern elements in this, which is really important. And I always repeat, I know, but Western region. So this is the reason why it's so unique compared to the inner regions of the party. And because this cultural phenomenon is more intense than in the other side of our country. My first title for this project the last year, at the end of the last year, was The Illusory Feeling of Freedom. And naturally I changed it to Revival, because during the last year I focused on how these ethnic minority groups revived their traditions. And I think that after we know what was the historical background, how many obstacles were there from these nationalities, I think that the traditions preserved represent the illusory feeling of freedom in this region, at the western border of our country. And one sentence that our first king, Saint Stephen, 1,000 years ago, in 1024, he said in our first law, and media sometimes forget it, I think, that a country with one language and one custom, this country is weak and fallible. And I think it's really, really important to know. And maybe not finally, but it's an important issue. But why did I start this project? Because I'm living here in Budapest, not in this region. Why I was interested in this subject. And it's sure that you remember in 2018, the newly rising wave of international migration shocked the world, especially Europe. And the public mood towards migrants was quite divided in Hungary as well. The newspaper, the media also talked a lot about this question. And my photographic work also aspires to be a reflection on societal prejudice which were affected these migrants. And I also wanted to show the fact, the media always forget it, or not always, but many times, that the internal and external migration is a constant phenomenon here in this country from the foundation of the state. It's not a new phenomenon. Hungary was also a transit line in Europe, in Eastern Europe, sorry. So it's really important to know. And I wanted to show that there is a really example how can nationalities living together for centuries. And I think this is the question of the future also. Finally, I think it's a really important thing that how can we preserve the ethnic identity, or how can these ethnic minority groups preserve their identity? And I wanted to also show that maybe the question, here is the question, what is the future of this ethnic identity? Sorry, so what is the future of this ethnic identity? And maybe it's a really interesting thing, because it's a universal and increasingly relevant issue across the world, and especially in Europe. And my personal experience, I think it's also important. What is my experience? I saw that the younger generation really want to preserve their tradition. There is a really strong connection between them, and not only between, but the other part of the Hungary, but the country also, and with the motherland also. You know, after the Second World War and after 1956, many families immigrated to another country, the USA, Austria, or to other neighborhood country, but they stayed, keep the touch, and it's a really strong effort. The location efforts is really visible, and for me it's a really good examples. And they know that they bring the new elements of Austria or Slovenia or from USA, or I don't know, but they always really wanted to participate in the tradition events, in the religion events. They really like to naturally wearing their tradition dresses, but it's not the most important tradition dresses. Ethnographic specialist says that maybe the ethnic minority culture is living only in a theatrical world, I don't know, but it's not true. I see that these ethnic minorities really try to preserve their history, their background, and their culture also. So at the beginning of my project, yes, I only wanted to observe the preservation and these cultural activities. But after I realized that this region is really unique before of the double border situation, because of the history background, because of the special geographical, political aspects. And naturally, after that I realized that the location and globalization question is really visible here. I think it's maybe it can be a uniform, it's a universal phenomenon. I can imagine that it's a universal thing in the world also. Not only in Hungary, and not only the western part, but in Hungary maybe here is more intense than in the other countries. So finally I wanted to say something to you. Yes. So yes, that I wanted to ask that how we can focus, or example me as a photographer, why I show it or why I started this project. Naturally, for example, the migration is a really complex question. Naturally, and there are political, economical, geographical, many important aspects. But as a photographer, I have to focus on these future questions also. Not only as a Hungarian, but as a Hungarian photographer, but as a human also. Because I think maybe in the future we have to make more lights on this issue, and not only in Hungary, but I think in the world also. And yes, naturally I have many histories that I get during my work, photography work, but maybe I could present to you what I wanted, what I imagined. And yes, thank you so much for your attention.